time to have our second panel, and this, I suppose, is the other side of the disconnect. This is now the chance to hear from the HR leaders. Let's introduce Rowan Fife, Lynn O'Connor, Deborah Baker, and Alistair Cochran, and Karen Gill, also from Everywoman. Welcome all of you.
Thank you.
Let's start with Rowan. You're a senior manager at Vodafone. You've been in HR for over 20 years. Started off in the Bass Taverns graduate scheme, so you'll be able to help us pull a pint later on this afternoon if we need you to. But also you've worked in retail, Woolworths, Kingfisher. We've heard from this first discussion that we had, one of the main subjects that seems to come up time and time again was lack of confidence, women not knowing their own worth. Is that something that you recognise in employers?
I think it is, and a lot of what people have said actually really resonates, which is that a lot of women always look at what they can't do before what they can do. So a lot of coaching conversations with high potential women, you know, talking about future roles, they say, well, I couldn't do that, well, why can't you? And they immediately tell you all the things why they can't do it. Don't know whether it's the same with men in terms of they automatically look at, actually, well, the opposite with men, they look at everything that they can do. So I don't think that, you know, women don't lack confidence in their roles at all. They perform fantastically. But it's just in terms of that self-confidence to actually put yourself forward and think, actually, I can do that role. And again, this whole, Ros was talking a little bit about goals, and actually if we've got that goal, having the self-confidence that actually this role is going to take us closer to it, and looking at what we can do rather than what we can't do. And it's that level of confidence, I think, that we miss.
Let's bring in Lynn O'Connor. She works for BP. Her career in HR is focused on enabling leaders to build organisational cultures for sustainable business performance. And her work's covered both regional and global implementations of organisational culture change. So it's all about changing it from within, isn't it?
It is,
really.
yeah.
She's also a fellow of the Institute of Personnel and Development. One of the things that the research revealed was that HR leaders really see the responsibility of women, and it's something we've been hearing about in the last half hour. It's the women's responsibility to drive their careers forward. It's not necessarily their managers. How can you get that message down to female middle managers? How can you make sure that they understand that they should be responsible for it?
And it, you know, it's a very key message actually that people do realise that they have to drive their career, because there's so many other people, as we've heard today, driving their own careers, and you can get left behind, and you know, and the time in a career actually passes incredibly quickly. I think it's twofold. I think, you know, as a woman driving your own career, you really need to work in an organisation who, you know, is trying to build an inclusive culture where everybody can succeed, irrespective of any difference, male, female, you know, or anything like that. And many organisations, you'll know, are looking to really get much better gender balance on their, not just their boards, but right through their pipeline. So you can be, as an individual, driving your career, but if you're in an organisation which is repelling you or is not actually supporting and enabling you, actually some of your efforts will not be coming to fruition. So I think in terms of the question, you know, the organisation and many of the big organisations are now really being very committed to what changes do they need to make to really be able to help women to succeed.
Let's bring in Deborah Baker. She's the Director of People here at Sky, and I hardly need to tell you that it's the UK's leading entertainment and communications company.
It certainly is.
Absolutely. But you've also had a lot of experience in retail at Ford, in retailing at Burberry. You've got a particular interest in driving value and insight through HR. What is the one thing that you think women can do to drive their ambition?
I would say exactly the same. I think belief in yourself. Women are fabulous. They've got the same level of ambition as anybody else. And I think it's that self-belief. You know, the last panel was talking about that little voice that a lot of women have that remind them all the things they're not as good at. I don't know why we have that. And I know that because I have it too. And I think that is something about women. You know, they'll look at a role and think, OK, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. Oh, dear, but I can't do that. Doesn't matter. Lots of people can't do everything. And I think we've got to concentrate more on our strengths and what we bring to the party, because it's exceptionally valuable.
A recent report coined the phrase "sorry skirts," saying that essentially women apologise too much in the workplace. Is that something that you've seen?
Yes, it's something I do as well. Because, you know, it happens to everybody. And I think, you know, there are differences between men and women, and I'm delighted about that, because that's why it's good to get a balance. But, you know, often I'll be writing something and the first thing that comes into my head is, oh, that wasn't quite as good as that. So, you know, I'm starting with what's not so good. And I'm thinking, no, don't do that. Put it at the end. Because actually that's not the most important thing.
Finally, let's bring in Alistair Cochrane. You're the MD of TNT Express Services for the UK and Ireland. Delivers 150 million items every year, not you personally, of course. You've been with the company for 25 years. You get a special award for being the only man on the panel today as well. You're a big supporter of this agenda. What difference has having a diverse workforce made to TNT?
I think it's huge. I think the one thing that all the businesses that are represented here today have in common is the differentiation that we have through the people that work for us. And those companies that are embracing diversity are also embracing diverse thinking. When you consider the challenges that business have had over the last few years, we've all had to think differently. The competitive advantage has become harder to find. So therefore, if we're embracing diverse thinking, we've got a lot greater opportunity to look at the exhaustive talent pools that we've got in our organisation. And it's not just in the male-dominated environment. Transport is very male-dominated, and we clearly need to embrace what is coming through from the female talent.
Karen Gill here from Everywoman. What is the business case for getting more women higher up in organisations like TNT?
I think the business case is huge. I think what's great about today is that most organisations, as Alistair is saying, understand that now, whereas a few years ago it was just seen as something that was politically correct to do. So, and it runs right across organisations, from firstly attracting the right talent from a much, much broader talent pool, rather than just looking at one talent pool that's been traditionally looked at. The other thing is what happens is the self-selecting out of the process that women do, or they simply leave an organisation when they're at their absolute peak. So I think there's a whole, loss of talent, which is really costly to an organisation. And then I think the diversity of thought. I mean, businesses have got to be so innovative today to be competitive. We work in such a highly competitive global marketplace that if you don't have innovation and you've only got one set of thinking going on, the group think going on, you're in trouble.
Lynn, what can organisations do to stop losing women? We heard that flexibility wasn't a big factor, actually, in a lot of the women questioned. But there are only 69% of female middle managers with children. So therefore, it does seem that they are self-selecting themselves out of the industry before they get into it. How can big companies stop losing the women at this crucial stage when they're coming into their own?
Yeah, I think if you take an organisation, I think first of all they need to look at what they have as an offering and what's the proposition for women, what challenges they have. So they might be in an industry that there are not many women, so science, engineering, technology, and more challenges for women coming through. Look at the entire, as an organisation, look at the proposition. So things that might attract women, certainly we know from all of the surveys, flexible working is an important one. It typically comes in the top three of either, are you attracted to an organisation, or would you leave an organisation because you don't have that? Now, that's not just for women, but I think that's a very key one. And I have a strong view that actually the world of work and the way work works, has been built by men and it's been built for men. So it kind of reflects the way that men do business. And it reflects a linear career. And women don't typically work in that way. They have truncated careers. So I think some of the reward systems, the value systems, what gets measured in capability models are still very male-dominated. Right down to things like the language that you might use on a job description, for example. So in the kind of role I do, we're trying to be very objective to say, how can we truly think about what kind of people we need in our organisation who are going to make this organisation successful? How can we attract them, and how can we have career proposition for them that's flexible in many different ways, so that we can really attract from the widest pool of talent. And women are key to that agenda in BP, but so are all of the other diversity strands as well, because as you quite rightly say, it goes back to the more diverse workforce you have, the more creativity. If you harness that, I should say, it will give you better business benefits.
Rowan, do you think that there is enough acknowledgement from management of the new skills that often women with children can bring to an organisation? I mean, I know before I had children, I was, you know, I used to spend my time off doing other things, but now when I come to work, I can juggle 16 things at once that I obviously I just couldn't do before I had kids. Women do learn new skills when they have kids, and they can come back to the workforce vastly enhanced, can't they?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, just the whole experience of having a child is a whole new learning experience anyway, which we all quickly grow. I mean, obviously men do as well, but we grow to, adapt to, and learn very quickly in terms of what we need to do, how we need to bring up that child. So the whole sort of learning experience, I think, for a lot of women when they come back to the workplace, it's actually very humbling. It puts you into a very different mindset in terms of where you're positioning your work, how you want to approach it, how you want to learn about how you do your job and the contribution you want to make. I know personally for me, it was very much around, you know, really focusing on the work when you're there and actually feeling as though you didn't have the time to do the sort of extra bits, so the sort of networking and the sort of after-work drinks and all the rest of it. So you're much more focused on sort of doing what you can in the time that you've got available. And I must admit, my time management improved beyond belief in terms of how I manage my diary, how I manage my time, so that I could get as much done as possible. And, you know, in terms of my employer, let me come back 4 days a week, which was fantastic. And I gave a huge amount of commitments because I had that flexibility.
Rowan talked there about being humble. Do you think, Deborah, that there is also possibly an issue with women coming back from maternity leave who are just pleased they've got a job and just keep their head down because they've got a bit of a work-life balance, they don't want to rock the boat?
We do have a great rate of women returners, and, you know, Lucy being one of them. And, you know, I think it is important for employers, you know, when they do take women returners back, you know, to get them, you know, up to speed as soon as possible again. And, you know, we've got instances where actually someone's returned back and they've got a pretty chunky, significant promotion sort of 2 months later. There's absolutely no reason why women should then suddenly decide, oh, my ambition, I need to tone it down a bit. Why would you do that? As you say, you know, you've got a whole new plethora of skills to bring to the party. Bring it on.
And often more financial responsibility as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Alistair, how do you see men and women presenting differently in your organisation in terms of driving their careers? Do you notice that the men in your organisation just do things in a different way that helps them move forward quicker?
I think they take ownership. I think one thing I'd advocate that I've heard a lot of this morning in the previous panel was the ownership piece. I think grasping the opportunity as well. I think that bring yourself to work because it's you that brings the value. And I think that's what I clearly see. Look, if I go back even on my own career, I didn't have a master plan that got me to where I was. I grasped the opportunities as they came up. Not massively educated, so I don't see that then becomes a burden. And if I could just answer a point that I heard on the previous part, I see mothers who are returning to work who work twice as hard to prove a point. I think to in a male environment clearly that we have. So I'd advocate that it's grasping the opportunity. I think it's stop asking for forgiveness. Stand up. I think that Angela said about this piece in front of you. Focus on what's in front of you and stop worrying about the things that sit on the periphery.
You talk about the women working twice as hard and doing very well, but what we saw from the research is that actually when the women are doing their jobs well, they're perhaps not promoted because their HR managers see them as just being great at their job and happy at their job. Rowan, how can these women who are burrowing away, really doing great guns, present themselves better to those above them? What is the best way women can present themselves?
It comes back to what Heather was saying around networking, actually having those relationships around starting to engage in broader conversations, building a profile a little bit so that people understand who you are and what you stand for and absolutely what value you're going to bring. So it starts, I think you get to a stage in your career where you absolutely there is that 6 inches in front of your face, but you are very conscious you actually need to start thinking and looking a bit broader than that because actually that's where that next role, that next opportunity is going to come. You don't know what it will look like, but those conversations can give rise to something happening.
Do you ever feel in that perhaps men are seen as being ambitious and it's seen as being a great thing, that if women are seen as wanting to move on in their career, they're just seen as whinging, or they're not?
Well, I think showing your ambition has not been typically a female thing, and we did talk a little bit earlier about the associations made with that, and therefore sometimes you're reticent to push that forward. But clearly, I think that will hold us back. And I was thinking of a conversation that I had with a very hugely senior leader in one of the top banks in the world, actually. And he said to me something that really struck home. He said, when I have lots of people come on my office door and ask me for guidance, he said, and typically the men will come in and say, please, can you give me some tips? Who can you introduce me to? Who will open the door for my next job? You know, who do you know? How can I navigate your network? You know, what tips can you give me to get to that next role? And he said, almost exclusively, the women never ask that question. And they say, what tips can you give me about me and my personal development and how I can improve my skills? And he said, there's been a marked difference. So, and he, you know, as a hugely senior leader, so I do think there's something, absolutely, as you said, about the visibility and pushing yourself forward and saying, look, I'm up for this, I'm looking for it, help me, who will support me? You know, and the other little piece of information that I think the audience might be interested in is we're working with one of the top headhunters in London, and they said to us that, you know, men typically, when they call, will take 8 out of 10 of the calls. So 8 men out of 10 will take the call. And women, only 2 out of 10 will take their call. So it's just, you know, oh, I'm fine, I don't need another job right now. So it's actually thinking about how are we really pushing ourselves forward to that next, you know, to that next role. And it doesn't have to be, you know, unfeminine, but actually women do have ambition, and it's about getting that on the table.
Deborah, do you notice a difference between male and female middle managers in terms of how the men push themselves, what they're doing?
Yes, I guess they're more likely to make it known that they want to do something different or ask for help. But I think, you know, I'm hoping that that's changing now, because I think it's very easy to ask for help. I think you know, if you want to drive your ambition, you've got to decide what it is you want to do. Because it isn't always about the next big title. You know, for me, a successful career isn't, you know, how much more money can I earn? It's, you know, what's satisfying to you? You know, are you really following your own personal ambitions? So I think it's really important to have a clear idea of what it is you want to do. And then look at the people that are doing that and just go up to them and ask. Because actually, most people will help. And putting the responsibility at anybody. It's not just females. You know, of course the company and managers have a role to play in it, but you know, it's not all one way. I think it's, you know, equal responsibility.
Can I just add something? This morning we were listening and hearing about what leaders and being experts in all the different facets of what they have to go on and do. We're not. They're not. There's plenty of people around there to support you as you go further on. It's about you as an individual and how you bring that team together and create the environment for that. You know, I'm not good at finance. I've got an operations manager. I've got a HR manager. From those individuals, you go for the expertise when it's actually called upon. So that I think we need to get away from this mindset that you have to be, you know, covering every single facet of it. Because when you sit down and interview somebody, that's never the case. Male or female, it's never the case. You're looking for the individual and what the individual can actually bring.
How important is having a sponsor at work to female career progression? We've talked a bit about role models, but what about finding a sponsor?
I think there's huge pieces of research out there about the power of sponsorship, and it shows that men in senior positions absolutely have sponsors. And the fundamental difference between a sponsor and a mentor is that a mentor will support you, give you guidance and advice, but a sponsor will use their chips on your behalf to progress your career, to help you get that next stretch opportunity. So if you look at where underrepresented groups, so women, you know, people, LGBT community, all of the research points to they have less sponsors and they have less role models to look up to, so that the whole thing is related. So if you can find a sponsor, and you have to do that by trust, because, you know, somebody is not going to put their neck on their career to support you if you don't.
They have to have a great deal of faith in you, don't they?
They do, absolutely, they do. And you know, great example. I had 5 months in Bermuda because I got sponsored by the CEO of the business to say, could you come and help with some change work? And I said, yes, please, surprisingly. And, you know, and that was absolutely about sponsorship. That was not, you know, not about any organisational system that job, you know, came up, so.
I think, sorry, can I just add in something I was going to say earlier in terms of the sort of putting yourself forward? I think a lot of it is about making the right people, not necessarily sponsorship or mentoring, it's right making a lot of people aware of what you're looking for, what you're after, you know, what you can value you can add. So then those opportunities like 5 months in Bermuda, you know, when they're thinking in the meeting, oh, who can we get? Oh, actually, so-and-so had a conversation with me, and so therefore those opportunities arise. You know, I don't think we should ever be afraid of, because if organisations don't know what we want, how can they second guess around what somebody needs? So we spend a lot of time as an organisation putting all these things in place, but actually if people are only comfortable being honest and saying, actually, this is what I want, we could better fit
But do you think
their
some
needs.
women just think, I'm being a bit of a pain, I don't want to keep bothering them?
Not at all. No. In terms of, you know, what I'm looking for out of their next role, how flexible or not you want to work, what skills you want to be developing, types of experiences you want to gain. You know, personally, I think that's a really valuable conversation to have with your manager, HR, whoever, so that those people have you on their radar, which to me isn't sponsorship, but anyway.
We've had another question on
Just
Twitter.
add in, Jane, I think one of the complexities around gender, where we currently sit right now, is, you know, 85% of the leaders in organisations are men. And it's a little bit more difficult for a woman to go up to Alistair and say, you know, Alistair, will you sponsor me? There is a real gender, what we get feedback from our members is a real gender issue around that. And it's also can be uncomfortable for a man to make that approach to a woman in the organisation to say, would you like me to sponsor you? So that we have to get out in the open.
Well, that's great, that point, because that's something that's actually just being made by Donna Robertson on Twitter. She says, how do we support more men to become involved in the gender balance conversation? I think that's obviously one for you, Alistair. I mean, how comfortable have you felt, you know, sort of taking on this mantle within the organisation?
Pretty comfortable. You know, I've got the heart of the... my heart is looking at the interest of the business. And to me, I think that embracing this, you know, diversity challenge that we've actually got, I think is only going to enhance what the business is. There is definitely a change in mindset. And I think that I'd advocate to all women that we need to embrace, take it on, you know, ask for it. You know, I agree with the comments that have been made. Sometimes it is difficult, but if you don't ask, I think there's a saying, isn't there, that being silent is the biggest obstacle to opportunity. You know, so you need to get over that. And yeah, if you go the first time and it doesn't work, well, maybe try again.
Another thing that research showed was that in terms of role models, that women, female middle managers do think that role models are really important, but actually, in reality, their role models, the senior women in their organisations, aren't necessarily helping them as much as they would like. Do you think that there needs to be perhaps more of an obligation, perhaps, on senior women to do more?
I do think that that's a very important piece, and the more mature you get in your career and the more advanced you've got, more to share. I think because you've got less women at the top, actually they get pulled into so many directions, and they do have a day job, so it's quite difficult to, for them to attribute their time accordingly. But certainly thinking about ways in which you can promote role models, and actually they don't. We just had a session with about 40 women, and they actually recognise that they don't necessarily look up to the most senior women. They're looking up like I think Heather was saying 1 or 2 levels up, and actually they're the ones that are more accessible. So maybe it's about leveraging, more of the middle to senior management women, and promoting them as role models as well.
I'd absolutely agree with that, because there'll be loads of role models in this room, actually, and there'll probably be someone thinking, yeah, but how could I be a role model because I haven't done X, Y and Z? Never think that. You will be a role model, and there are lots of new people coming into to companies now. It's not about being the most senior person. It's actually about someone that can give you some practical and sound advice, and someone that you can say, oh, when someone asks me to do this, I feel like X, Y and Z. Is that normal? How can you help me stop feeling like that, or whatever? So I would encourage anybody, to be very open and offer advice to younger people coming up.
Good advice, Deborah. Well, let's open it out again to the panel. We've heard a few Twitter questions. If you could raise your hand if you've got any questions for our HR leaders here, please.
What do you think companies could put in place, or what advice would you give to women when they come back for children about how they can get their confidence back up and sort of prove that they are up for promotion and for progression?
Yeah. No, I certainly recognise those comments. I think when you come back from maternity leave, I think you've got to be very open with someone that you can talk about your fears and your worries, because often they're your fears and worries and not the fears and worries of the line managers that are around you. So they may not think that you're even thinking like that, if you understand what I mean. And I think, you know, you've just got to be very clear about, you know, you're back now, this is what you want to do. There's absolutely no reason why you should be treated any differently whatsoever.
Some coaching support can really help them see quite differently then that actually, OK, right, now is time to move on, because I agree there is a real risk that people just plateau for a couple of years because it feels too risky to sort of upset the apple cart a bit by taking on a bigger role, because it would change the sort of
especially when children are very young, when childcare is often a really crucial issue, isn't it? And if work changes, childcare changes, the knock-on effect is huge.
Yes.
Let's get some more questions. Lady down at the front there.
It was mentioned by the panel that women tend to leave the organisation at the peak of their career. And I suppose it was just understanding, why do we do that? Is it a case because we feel disvalued by the organisation and we're not recognised at the time when we feel that we are at our peak? Or is it because it's easier to go to an external stranger and sell ourselves and promote ourselves because we are then able to be who we are?
I'll put that to Lynn.
Gosh, that's. I was just thinking, what a brilliant question that is, actually. I personally, I think it's easier to go and sell myself externally. Actually, I hadn't really thought about it in that way, because actually you can truly be who you are. And I think in an organisation, and the longer that you get there, you know that people have preconceived views about you and have you in boxes because of the roles you've done or the kind of work that you've been involved in. And that's a real shame, actually, because, you know, organisations do want to retain their talent, and actually perhaps as women, you know, we're missing again out on an opportunity there. So I'm going to give that some serious thought, actually.
I mean, Karen, your research was about following the pipeline. I mean, should women be breaking out of the pipeline?
They should be. I mean, I think it's quite a complex issue, but I think what I was referring to was actually when women get into middle management, it is when they're in their early 30s. And of course, there's been a huge shift in when we have children. That tends to be when we start families. But what's also happening is we're just self-selecting ourselves out because we're not seeing role models in the senior positions. It's kind of when we go, it's all getting a bit too hard, and we plateau. But I think your question is great because, you know, I think it would be so much easier to reinvent yourself in a different organisation than the one you're in.
How can we get women to understand the value that they bring, the value that they have, Deborah?
It's, you know, sitting down and just being very clear with yourself about what you're really good at, because there will be lots of things. And just, you know, even if it's as practical as actually writing them down and just reminding yourself, you know, this is what I'm good at and this is why I'm good at my job.
OK, we're out of time, I'm afraid. Just time, though, for one last point on Twitter. It's not a question. It's from Charlotte Johns, and she says, are brave women more successful than those skilled at their jobs? Is bravery the key to male success? The answer, she says, women, be brave. She's put it in capitals. She obviously believes it. Thank you very much to all of our panel, Rowan, Lynn, Deborah and Alistair. Thank you all very much. It's time for you now to rejoin the audience.